Hello there, listener. It's a special Totally Football show with special Seb Stafford-Bloor.
Hello, Jimbo.
Hey, thanks for joining us from Germany and from a very rosy-tinted West London, James Horncastle.
Hello.
Hello to you both. So, we're just days away now from the first of this season's European finals, Wednesday night in Dublin. What a game this looks set to be. Two extraordinary teams, two extraordinary stories behind them. Welcome to Utopia, my friend.
Indeed, James.
Yeah.
Thank you as the gatekeeper to Utopia for welcoming us there. I'm sure Atalanta and Bayer Leverkusen are happy to see you there at the pearly gates of Utopia.
Indeed so. Indeed so. Bayer Leverkusen having their own kind of heavenly time of it at the moment, Seb Stafford-Bloor. 51 games unbeaten now after the victory over Augsburg this weekend. If you'd said back at the start of the season, there's going to be a German side, they're going to be chasing a treble and they're not going to lose a single game, you go, yeah. Especially if you said, and they bought a player in from North London, you go, yeah, it's Bayern Munich, isn't it, with Harry Kane? But it's not, Seb, is it?
Surely it is not, Jimbo. Actually, I think pretty early on, and if you speak to a few Leverkusen players, they probably tell you the same thing. Around the time they beat RB Leipzig on the first day of the season, I think a few of them said, we're good. I don't think they thought they were going to be 51 games, potentially 53, an undefeated domestic and European treble. I think they thought they were going to be that good. But there was something in the chemistry almost immediately about his team, something in the way that a lot of these players enjoy not just playing together, but spending time together away from the pitch. A lot of these players are very, very close. I think one of the traps we fall into is because football moves so quickly, you can sometimes forget just to pause and think, hey, this might not happen again. And if it does, it might not happen again for decades. Because Leverkusen, yes, the Bundesliga was special winning it, but remaining unbeaten despite having had it won for 6 weeks, despite all the tension coming out of their season, despite having these bigger days on the horizon and the medals in their pocket already, to remain kind of almost compulsively stuck in 5th or 6th gear, it's an amazing accomplishment. And I don't know, in 6 days' time, it could be one of the great European football seasons.
Standing their way, an Atalanta side who, while not making quite the same headlines as Xabi Alonso's team, have had a remarkable season themselves, James?
Yeah, they secured Champions League football for the 4th time under Gasperini this weekend in Lecce, which, again, is not something to be taken for granted. A team that had never played in that competition before Gasperini took over. So to do it 4 times is remarkable. I know bean counters at the club would probably say that's more important to us than winning a trophy, be it the Coppa Italia final, which they lost last Wednesday, be it the Europa League final that they play this Wednesday. But Gasperini afterwards, there's that Italian song, isn't there? These are the best times of our lives, James, that Carlo Ancelotti likes to sing. It's his kind of karaoke number. And Gasperini was very much singing from the same hymn sheet. These days have been quite stressful. There's a lot of games to prepare. They've lost some players to injury. Martin de Roon, for example, won't be in the Europa League final. Such a big part of this era at Atalanta. Kolasinac also a doubt as well. And yet there are days to savour. The idea that Atalanta will be playing a little bit like Leverkusen, a full, complete season of 38 games in Serie A and then 2 finals. That's the maximum that you can ask. It's the most number of games that a team can play in a season, and so I think he's still extremely proud of them, even though they lost against Juventus in the Coppa Italia final last Wednesday.
All right. Well, it would be remarkable if they were able to do what no one else has done this season, and that is beat Bayer Leverkusen. We'll touch on the extraordinary streak that Xavi's put together and the reasons perhaps behind it next. 51 games unbeaten, and it might have been just 4, Seb, if it hadn't been for a softish penalty call 93 minutes into their game against Bayern back on September the 15th. What was that? Game 4, Game 5 of the Bundesliga. And, 2-2 it finished thanks to that decision for the penalty. Who would have guessed back then what was in store? A team who've made impossibly late comebacks, an almost weekly occurrence. We've asked you before some of the reasons for this. Is there any kind of consensus now in Germany about what it is that makes Bayer able to pull off these escape acts again and again?
I think I'd narrowed it down to two things. The first is this absolute conviction in their ability to create chances. When you talk to their players, and this is obviously a question they've been asked an awful lot over the past 2 or 3 months, they invariably say something along the lines of, we're not worried that a chance is going to come along. We know that it will. We just have to keep playing our football. We don't have to change our rhythms or change the way that we're attacking. We don't start hurling balls towards the penalty box and hoping for the best. We just keep playing. So there's a real composure about the way that they play. And I think over time it becomes self-fulfilling. If you look back at some of the goals they've conceded, the one I always think of is not against Bayern Munich, because it was a little bit of a fortuitous penalty decision. It's the one in Leipzig where the Grimaldo corner goes all the way across the penalty box and there's Hincapié at the back post to tap it in. It's kind of terrible bit of defending, but then it's kind of evidence of the way for a lot of the teams they faced, this late goal thing got in their heads a bit. And it started to affect the way they defended, it affected the way they played. Against Stuttgart the other week, when of course the title was already won, Stuttgart ran up into a 2-0 lead, half back to 2-1, and then all of a sudden they kind of stopped playing football, and it sort of, they sat and waited for what everybody else knew was kind of inevitable, the late equaliser. And I think from both sides it has become a sort of a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. The other thing here is that, and Thomas Müller spoke about this after Bayern got beaten 3-0 in Leverkusen, and that kind of ended the title. He was kind of criticised, or Bayern were criticised, for the way they conceded the Josip Stanisic goal, the one that sort of set the tone for the evening. And he said, well, hey, listen, no one sees these patterns of play in the way that Leverkusen attack. They create chances in almost kind of an ad-libbing way, and so it's very difficult to prepare yourself for balls coming in from one direction, or little phases of play, or little automatisms around the edge of the box, because they free flow and they have a very ad hoc quality to the way that they create chances. And if you're chasing goals and you have more than one way of creating those chances, that's a very useful skill. And so together, those two things add up to something pretty powerful in late stage of the games.
It's the most dramatic team to watch this season because they just do it again and again. Result-altering goals they have scored after 90 minutes have been played in 11 matches this season. We've seen it time and time again in this competition, in the Europa League particularly. Both games against Karabag in the last 16, they were able to do that, coming back from 2 goals down, certainly in one, I think possibly in both. We saw it in the Roma game, the second leg against Roma, James, when it really looked like this time their number was up.
Yeah, it really did. To the point where I was having to hurriedly kind of rewrite and say, oh, okay, this is another Romontada. It's 2018 all over again. Roma are coming back from no man's land. And what really impressed me, particularly in the final 15 minutes, was, okay, Leverkusen had won the first leg by a couple of goals. And so Xabi Alonso was able to rotate his team, and I would say play a team that wasn't full strength, his main starting 11. But they were still magnificent. I mean, in the first half, I hadn't seen a team dominate like that all season in the way that they did. They still went 2 goals behind. And as Seb said, doesn't seem to really bother them. And yet then they were able to bring on the likes of Patrick Schick, Florian Wirtz, and, so that's quality that they can bring off the bench, or were able to in those circumstances. The other thing that really struck me was watching Frimpong from like the 85th to the 95th minute sprint as though it was the first few minutes of the game. He didn't look tired at all. He looked like he was still full of energy, and he was running up and down, riling the crowd up after the first goal. I wish I had his energy. He was so they're clearly very well prepared from a physical and athletic standpoint as well.
I think what's really interesting about Jeremie Frimpong is after the Augsburg game, you're right about the energy, James, because after the Augsburg game, all the players came in to the mix zone and the journalists hasn't really assembled, so they're with their families. And I think Jeremie Frimpong had about 5 or 6 family members there, including his mum. And he was hugging his mum, and there was a kind of a TV camera nearby. And he kind of pulled his mum in front of the TV camera and said, hey, this is my mum. Everybody, look, this is my mum. It was really, really lovely. It's one of those, I don't think we get to see tender moments in football very often. And he's clearly a big family man. But yeah, he just doesn't seem tired. Whenever you see him at any stage of a match day, whether he's just played 90 minutes, 120 minutes, just boundless energy. And I think if you're facing that, and if you know that, for instance, Nathan Tell is able to do a really good job off the right side, Josip Stanisic is excellent, so you can be facing potentially someone like Frimpong from the 70th minute onwards. What a nightmare. What a nightmare to have a player that has those physical attributes, but also has this habit of turning up in the right position at the right time again and again and again. And so it becomes this kind of mental examination of your defence as well. It'd be terrible to play against.
Who's going to be in charge of dealing with Frimpong, would you say, James, for Atalanta?
Well,
How will Gasperini look to shut down such a potent part of the Bayer attack?
Well, I mean, De Rossi alternated between playing a back 3 and a back 4. Sort of wanted to almost overman Leverkusen or go man for man out wide, make sure that they weren't numerically inferior, as they say on those sides. But particularly, I remember that Frimpong late run, stoppage time, which leads to the corner, which leads to the goal. I mean, that would be on Atalanta's left hand side. So, I mean, you're asking. I mean, the thing is, Gasp will alternate his centre backs depending on who he thinks is the best man marker for the opponent. They all switch around. So it could be Jim City. It could be Scalvini who's back. But there's this thing about this Leverkusen side, and De Rossi explained it very well against Roma, is that if you press them too hard, they rotate, they're good with the ball, and they can pick you apart with their possession game, and then find space in behind. If they go in front, and then you're invited to basically get a goal back, they've got extremely quick players on the counter-attack, and so they are a complete team. They can beat you in lots and lots of different ways. And I know, for example, with that Roma game, it did look like for a moment that the game was going to go to extra time, but it really wasn't a balanced game. In both legs, Roma had this. I suppose this is the one thing you can draw encouragement from if you're an Atalanta fan, is that Roma could have scored 3 goals in the first leg. They did score 2 goals in the second leg. But by the same token, Leverkusen could have scored probably 9 over both legs. I mean, the man of the match for Roma in the second leg was Svilar, the goalkeeper. I think Atalanta will be more potent in attack than Roma were. Even though, as I mentioned, Roma scored twice and could have scored maybe 5 over both legs. And that's because Scamacca and De Ketelaere. Scamacca was missing for the Coppa Italia final defeat to Juventus. He was suspended. He was outrageously good against Lecce on Saturday, assisted and scored. His assist for De Ketelaere was beautiful. Gasp brought on De Ketelaere and Edison. I think they will start.
Put De Ketelaere on.
Put De Ketelaere on. Will he come to the boil? He didn't come to the boil in the Coppa Italia final, but he scored a lovely goal against Lecce, 1v1 dink over the goalkeeper from quite a narrow angle. So, I mean, you can see it from the league table. Atalanta are a better team than Roma. They're a more complete team than Roma. So,
they're also a team that's ended some other unbeaten runs. already this season. We'll talk about that next. James, so much excitement about Leverkusen and their story this season. They haven't been in a European final since 2002. Is that right, Seb? In the Real Madrid game in Glasgow, they did win this competition back when it was called the UEFA Cup, and it was a two-legged affair back in 1988 against Espanyol. Atalanta, though, by contrast, they've never been to a European final. I mean, people might be used to them kind of knocking around the midweek fixtures in the Champions League group stage or whatever, but as you were mentioning before Gasp came along, they hadn't had any continental football since, I think, 1991.
Yeah, and the closest they'd come to a European final was a Cup Winners' Cup in the late 80s, when they were a second division team. It's one of those bizarre things. They'd qualified for the Cup Winners' Cup because as losers in the Coppa Italia final, because the winners had already qualified for European competition. So they had this entire Serie B campaign in the Cup Winners' Cup, which was kind of very novel. But I mean, Atalanta have come close to doing big things in Europe under Gasperini. You think of that quarter-final against PSG where they were 1-0 up going into stoppage time. Atalanta down to 10 men. They'd used all their substitutes, so they couldn't replace the injured Remo Freuler. And then Choupo-Moting and Marquinhos scored in stoppage time as PSG went to the semi-finals and then the final. So it's a team that still has a core of players who've played in multiple big European games for Gasperini. I mentioned De Roon, who will be injured, but also there's Jim City, there's Toloi, who's still around, there's Hatibor, who's still there. Players who really kind of understand, if not the Atalanta identity, then the Gasperini identity.
And they're a team that like ending unbeaten runs. The victory at Liverpool at Anfield, Liverpool hadn't lost a home game there in over a year. The previous visiting team to win there was Real Madrid. Liverpool equally had gone 13 in all competitions this season, home and away, before Atalanta went there and won in such resounding fashion. They also ended Sporting's unbeaten run. So, what do you think? Could they be the team, James?
They could, yeah, absolutely. I think they're the team that Pep Guardiola described as it's like going to the dentist. When you play against.
He also said they can beat any team they want.
Yeah, and he also gave them the kiss of death before the Coppa Italia final. He was doing one of his press conferences where he's like, "Did you see how well they played against Roma? Wow!" And that sort of thing. And then they went and I wouldn't say they put in a bad performance. It was just Juventus put in their best performance of 2024. So, I absolutely believe this team can win something, deserves to win something. That's not to say they will. But it is a remarkable story that, Atalanta sold Rasmus Højlund to Manchester United last summer. They sold other players too, and they've reinvested it in, as Gasp was saying last night, in Scamacca and De Ketelaere, who didn't score more than 3 goals each, I think, last year for West Ham and AC Milan. And yet they're into not just double figures, but they've scored or assisted 20 goals, more than 20 goals apiece this season.
Wow.
And, having guys like that, I think always gives you a chance. And they've also got, I think, probably the best midfield in Serie A after Inter's. In that, to essentially have guys like Teun Koopmeiners, who all the top teams in Italy want. He's got some Premier League interest as well. Koopmeiners is one of those players who's in to more than 20 goals for goals and assists, which is remarkable considering Atalanta signed him as a centre-back from AZ Alkmaar. Edison as well is just someone who you can sometimes be forgiven for thinking there are 4 Edisons on the pitch. He covers that much ground. So I think the thing is Musso will be in goal rather than Kaniseki, because Musso has been their cup goalkeeper. I know Leverkusen do the same, Seb, I think, for the cups. But Musso had lost his place to Kaniseki. Was one of the few kind of signings that Atalanta got wrong. They spent a lot of money on him, around 18 million when he came from Udinese, and he's made a few gaffes. But he's been good in the Europa League up until now.
Up until now.
Let's see.
All right. Well, so the big game Wednesday. What do you think? James is confident. Seb, they've come this far. Surely they can't be stopped now.
Yeah, no, I would always favour Leverkusen. I think also Lonces does such a fine job of maintaining the kind of the rhythms in the side, the tension, the technical tension. I also think that if you look back across the season, there aren't many keys or clues as to how you do beat them. I mean, matching up with them technically is extremely difficult. Physically, there are a couple of players who can be ruffled if you go hard on them or if you challenge them. Dortmund did quite a good job of that at the Westfalenstadion, even though obviously, inevitably, Leverkusen came in with his 97th minute winner. But Leverkusen can look after themselves as well. They've got sort of big, hefty players, people like Robert Andrich in there, Jonathan Tah. Both of those wide centre-backs are extremely gifted technically, but physically imposing and athletic. I don't know how you beat them. And I also think one of the big problems is, James sort of touched on this earlier, and he's absolutely right. You can bring players into the starting lineup and you can mess about with the starting 11. It has no real influence. It doesn't disrupt them. It doesn't cause them to check their stride. So you'd expect the starting lineup to kind of pick itself. But then from that, you can bring in Nathan Teller or, for instance, a Stanisic possibly, or Adley, or... I mean, you could probably flip a coin for Patrick Schick or Victor Boniface to start. Both of those present equally difficult but slightly different challenges. And so you're not preparing to face 11, 12 or 13 players. In a way, you've got to face 16. And no one's been able to come up with an answer to it.
Well, if you've got four Edisons on the field, then that might be
that might help.
The way around. Yeah. Whatever. It's going to be an amazing game, though, because... the amazing Atalanta story in their first ever European final against this Bayer Leverkusen team who could well do something that is just unprecedented. And as you were saying before, Seb, it'll be a long time before anyone comes close to matching. Should be just an amazing game, no?
Yeah, and I think it's actually really encouraging for European football because these are two cities that don't often get to European finals. We mentioned this is Atalanta's first. It's not Leverkusen's, but they don't get to them regularly. Two relatively small cities. I think there was that statistic about it being, in terms of population, the smallest that has ever been to a European final between Bergamo and Leverkusen. And also, I think Atalanta over the last 7 or 8 years, how many times have we been here, James, and we've asked the question or written an article about, is this it for Atalanta? This team's that's going to get picked apart. They can't sustain this, can they? And yet Gasperini has stayed throughout that time. We'll see if he stays this summer. They've been able to reinvest the money that they've got from some of their big names, or players that become big names at Atalanta. And Leverkusen, the example that they've set this year with Xabi Alonso, for example, saying, I'm going to stay as well. I think it shows that there is a path that goes that diverges from what we see on social media, which is like, this guy's going to move, isn't he? Or this team's going to be broken up. And it's like, no, they're going to reach Europa League finals. They're going to go undefeated for an entire season. Wow. It's the magic of football, James.
They're going to be losing 2-1 with 89 minutes played, and then everybody's going to go, oh my goodness, here we go again.
Yeah, frauds, something like that to that effect.
you know what's pretty fun as well is that take all the sort of the transfer stuff out of it, and yes, you must leave and go and join a massive club immediately. These are two teams where, as pieces of architecture, they're kind of fascinating. Like, we talk about the coaches, both coaches. Lonzo was speaking last week about how much respect he had for Gasperini and the challenge that awaits his
so good
side. that was spot on. And that seems so at odds with the kind of the culture of, hey, big star, big performance from individual player, that's going to decide it. Storylines, controversy, conspiracy theory. It's just so feels like it's very nourishing for European football, a final between these two.
Excellent. All right, well, Wednesday evening in Dublin, it's happening. Many, many thanks, Seb and James, for stopping by to give us the full context to the Europa League final, and look forward to catching up with you again soon. Listener, thank you for being with us today. And Liam and producer Charlie in the booth. We'll be back on Thursday to review what goes down in Dublin. For now, though, from all of us here, it's goodbye. The Totally Football Show podcast is available 3 times a week, bringing you all the football news you could reasonably be expected to care about. We've got views, we've got stats, we've got analysis, we've got some of the best football writers around, and the whole thing is absolutely free. So have a listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or all the usual places by clicking on the link below.